about Netflix, and I will lay out the Contrarian's bearish case. So here's the thing. I love Netflix. You love Netflix. We all subscribe to Netflix. So Netflix is on top of the world. It's invincible, right? Well, there are some, it's the minority, of course, who believe that Netflix has some cracks and has some vulnerabilities. And I'm going to lay out that case today. That's what this session's about. First, before I get into Netflix specifically, let me talk about a little bit context, give you some context about where things are during this last crazy year. Obviously, it's been a tale of two entertainment industries, the in-home entertainment market and the out-of-home entertainment market. In-home, streaming, games, chatting with your friends, those have all been significantly bolstered, or it's been a very positive thing in a strange way for those services because we consume more content in home than ever before because we're locked down. And sadly, it looks like that lockdown is going to get worse in the next several months. And so let's hope that we get our arms around that as a society, and let's hope that the government finally starts getting its act together. I have hope. But in any event, so tale of two sectors. In-home market, streaming is one of the biggest aspects of that, where Netflix lies. And then the out-of-home entertainment market, which has been decimated, obviously for obvious reasons. So movie theaters, live events, sporting events, theater. That's the context. So let's get into the video world specifically. So we'll drill down a little bit from the top context to where the video world is today. So we live in a world of what they call SVODs and AVODs. Well, that's really kind of the first go-to place now. Your subscription video on demand, that's the SVODs. And then now there's advertising video on demand as well, because something called subscription fatigue. And that's when you have subscription services like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, like Apple TV Plus, which cost you money monthly basis. So now you've had this counterculture of advertising video on demand that's come in because we only have so much money to spend on subscription services. So that's AVOD. We have already pre-pandemic, we were already in a world that they call cord cutting, where you had your cable cords and cable bundles that were very expensive. And pre-pandemic, there was a massive acceleration already about people cutting the cord, as they say, and going direct to consumer, subscribing to individual channels like HBO, like Netflix being a service and essentially its own channel, but getting exactly what you want. That was the great promise of cutting the cord. And then during the pandemic, live linear television, linear, it means the live channels that you see in your program guide. Well, live television was really decimated because not as much news. We've watched a lot of news, a lot of CNN, a lot of MSNBC, a lot of Rachel, but we have not, in the early days, we didn't watch much in terms of sports because there wasn't any. And that was decimating it decimated the linear channels and ESPN, by the way, too. So that's some backdrop. Then we get into the great streaming wars. So narrowing it down to the competition that Netflix faces. If you feel that Netflix can face competition, well, they do. And I'll talk about it a little bit. So yes, again, we all subscribe to Netflix, but not just Netflix only, because we can't get everything we want from Netflix. As much content as they have, we have to go to other places. And so now there's Amazon Prime Video. So if you subscribe to Amazon Prime, you get Amazon Prime Video thrown in for free. Well, it's not free. It's thrown in there for your Prime package. And the reason why Jeff Bezos does that is because he wants to give you more reasons to shop. So the more you engage on Amazon Prime Video, the more you'll buy. And the way that Bezos uses it is advertising or marketing for their big store in the sky. That's what Amazon Prime is. And of course, you have Apple TV Plus, which has underperformed significantly because they don't have that much original content. And by the way, yes, ESPN can be technically part of the Disney bundle, but doesn't need to be part of the Disney bundle. It can be separate. So just wanted to point that. But in any event, you have Apple TV Plus that came out the gates about a year ago. And Apple TV Plus, just like Amazon uses video as marketing for its core services, which is shopping, Apple TV Plus uses its Apple TV Plus service so that you come into the world of Apple and you buy the Apple TV, the hardware device, you go to the Apple stores, they can bundle things together, but it's not as much about the service itself necessarily making money in and of itself. It's about generating more of a home base, an ongoing engagement or relationship with you, the consumer, so you'll buy more. And ultimately, it will be part of a much bigger package of Apple One services. So anyhow, then Disney Plus. Disney Plus launched about a year ago too, just crossed 73 million subs, paid subscriptions, which is a big deal. Netflix is up to 195 million. I'll get more into that. So Netflix is way up there. And then HBO Max just launched about 4 or 5 months ago. And HBO Max is still, about 30 million paid subs, still a little bit confusing in terms of its branding. There was HBO Max. A lot of consumers are still trying to figure out exactly what that is. But again, if you want certain HBO shows, you don't get them on Netflix. You don't get them on Apple TV Plus. You got to subscribe to HBO Max. And so, there's a lot of, this is what they call the streaming wars, because you have all these big players who are fighting for your limited dollars that are in your pocket. Netflix, we all probably subscribe to Netflix. So that's kind of a given, right? Well, we'll talk about that. But anyhow, so you have Netflix. That takes $15 a month out of your pocket. What's next for you? Disney Plus? If you are a parent, Disney Plus is probably your second choice if you have young kids. Or if you love Star Wars or Pixar movies or some of their other franchise films, then Disney Plus, because you can't get them on Netflix. And then HBO, same thing. If you want Big Little Lies or other shows like that, you won't get them elsewhere. So anyhow, that's the streaming wars. I mentioned subscription fatigue. That's a real phenomenon. That's something that's going to play out. Not all of these big players and the others are going to be able to be winners in this space. Some will be behemoths like Netflix, unless they're vulnerable. And then some will carve out smaller niches, but it's a fight for your mind share, for your dollars, for your engagement. So those are the big guys, but there are also non-behemoths, what I call them, kind of the smaller niche players, because right now, who can really launch a service that competes with the big guys that cover it all? It's a tough road. It's a really tough road. But for a certain niche programming that is relevant and speaks to a specific audience that's underserved by some of these behemoths, those really have an opportunity still to succeed in this subscription video on demand world, even though you have subscription fatigue and limited dollars. So I'll give you an example. If you love horror, Shudder is a service that I think it costs something like $5 a month, and you may sign up for that, and they do that really, really well. Acorn TV, as somebody just mentioned, Ariana, thank you. Yes, Acorn TV, absolutely. I think Acorn is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I think Acorn is about international content, British content. And then you have some small little new brands. One I urge you to check out is 88 Rising. It's a very hot music-driven brand that's focused on video and a whole lifestyle around Asian pop culture and very music-driven. So 88 Rising is a hot young brand, again, showing that even in a world of giants, you can still succeed if you take a narrower approach that gives you more, a better experience, better content that speaks directly to an audience that is underserved in the marketplace. And because they found their home with you in this niche, they're willing to pay dollars because they're happy. They're pleased that they have somebody. So, and Luis, yes, you're a Shudder guy. He says that they just crossed 1 million subscribers. Pretty good for a niche service. But here's the thing. Those are kind of the main storylines. There was one very big storyline this year that you may or may not have heard. So text me if you've heard of Quibi. So Quibi was the big gamble by Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman. Jeffrey Katzenberg, one of the biggest moguls in Hollywood, and you have Meg Whitman, who's one of the biggest tech titans out of Northern California. They came together to revolutionize premium content for your mobile device. And it was geared to you, young people, and it was a subscription service that was meant to use Hollywood production budgets, so like huge budgets, up to $120,000 per minute. And it was going to give you stories that are broken down into chapters by Steven Spielberg, and a number of other big time names. Not all, but a lot of them. That was the story. And they were going to capture what they thought these bite-sized moments of your day. Well, anyhow, I see that some of you have heard about it, but that's the problem. Most of you probably haven't even heard of Quibi. Well, listen to this. Despite the fact that they raised $1.6 billion to get this thing off the ground, and that was Katzenberg and Whitman, they launched in, I think it was April, and last month they already shut down. It is one of the biggest stories of the entertainment world this year. It was they swung for the fences. I respected that by Katzenberg. I interviewed him about a year ago, and I respected that. They always had a long road ahead of them, and they didn't make it. So anyhow, that's the background. So let's get back to the main event. Netflix. On top of the world, we love it. Invincible. It's the king of the streamers. We can't live without it, especially now, and they've benefited from that. So you see here, this is a snapshot of Netflix's market value and stock price from going back to December 1st, 15th to yesterday. And as you can see, they've done okay. The stock has just climbed. And so for those of you who've invested, don't use Robinhood, by the way. It's too dangerous. Don't use it. But for those of you who have invested, and you did it a while ago, you've done just fine. Okay, but this, maybe you'll get something out of this session that they aren't invincible. At least there are contrarians. So that's what it is. So what are the threats for Netflix in this clever little graphic of Threatflix? Let's first talk about their latest earnings report. So quarterly earnings, publicly traded companies, they have to report by law on a quarterly basis their results, their earnings results, how they're performing, whether they've made money, lost money, major metrics like that. Well, Netflix just in the last couple of weeks had their latest earnings report for quarter 3, that's Q3. It's quite amazing. As you can imagine, the pandemic really accelerated the growth of subscriptions. So the number of subscribers now for Netflix is an amazing, astounding 195 million paying subs worldwide. So the pandemic, all these months when we were locked in, it was a good thing for the company in terms of its performance, in terms of demand for its services. And so it was a beneficiary, and it is a beneficiary of these crazy lockdown times. But that's the total number of subscribers. But in the last quarter, interestingly, their additions were only 2.2 million worldwide, 2.2 million. And Wall Street, so analysts expected them to add about 3.57 million. So they underperformed there. Now, one other interesting thing, 2.2 million on a quarterly basis is less than they've delivered for the past several years, several quarters. Now, the others on the other side would say, and there's merit to this for sure, that in Q1 and Q2, the number of subscribers accelerated so much that it's natural that there would be a drop off in quarter 3. That's the kind of the case. But there's the counter to that. And I think there's truth to that. But in any event, it's really important to watch the subscriber count. And it is a red flag that I'll talk about a little bit more. So the market cap, which means how much does the Wall Street investors, how much do they value this company? What is the valuation that they put on it? $215 billion as of yesterday. Now, to put that in perspective, I think Amazon's nearly 2 billion, excuse me, it is 2 trillion, nearly $2 trillion. And Apple is also right around there too. So they benefit substantially. Much bigger than Netflix. But nonetheless, Netflix, $215 billion. Their revenues last quarter were up compared to what analysts had expected of them. But their earnings, so their actual profits, what they put in the pocket, those were down. Those were actually down from what they expected. And interesting. So they were, earnings were up. They were what they call cash flow positive for the last quarter. Cash flow positivity is different than, I'm not going to get overly analytical here, don't worry. But cash flow positivity is different than being profitable, because if your profitability from a corporate perspective for Wall Street purposes and for reporting is done on a certain technical basis that accountants use called GAAP, and GAAP has various tricks of the trade. So Netflix has been GAAP profitable for quite some time, but they've been cash flow negative, and I'll explain why, most of their time. And this was a rare time. This last quarter was a rare time when they weren't cash flow negative. So that means that they brought in more money than they actually spent. When you're cash flow negative, you need to get money somewhere else. So although the last quarter sounds generally positive, here's the deal. They are typically cash flow negative. That is a major red flag that contrarians point to about Netflix, because conventional wisdom is that this is a highly profitable company, but because they, and I'll get into why, they spend so much money that they generally lose money on a cash basis in real time. So, and in their latest earnings report, they reported that they expect to be cash flow negative all next year, anywhere from $1 billion cash flow negative, so of losses from a cash outflow perspective, to $0. But they'll be somewhere in between 0 to 1 billion. But given the fact that they spend so much money, it will be a significant number. So that's something that contrarians point to. And here's so that's a red flag. Despite all this positive and the success and the fact that we all use it, here are some vulnerabilities that I'm going to point out about Netflix. So this is where contrarians would point to these kinds of things. I've written about several of these myself. First, one of the major vulnerabilities of Netflix is just its business model compared to the other major streamers out there, like Amazon, like Apple, even like Disney. And that's because Netflix is what I call a pure play subscription service. Pure play meaning that the only way they make money is one revenue stream: subscriptions. Your $15 a month. And now those subscriptions are going up to like $17.99 for a high end. That was just announced 2 weeks ago. So that's their sole way of making money, subscription revenues. Meanwhile, the competition, all those other big guys, as I said, they use their video service, their Netflix killers, they use them as marketing, advertising to draw you in so that you spend money on their core services. That's what they do. So like for Apple, as I said, they use Apple TV Plus to bring you into the world of Apple, so then they can make money from iPhones, Macs, Apple One now, their subscription service that way. But it's not necessarily about Apple TV Plus being profitable in and of itself. It's about working the whole machine. It's a multifaceted business model, multiple revenue streams as opposed to one from Netflix. So for Amazon, as I mentioned before, Amazon Prime is the big, that's the big kahuna for Amazon. They want you to spend your $100+ a year for Amazon Prime, and you get Amazon Prime Video thrown in as an incentive to you to stay there, engage with them and think about Amazon always and be shopping and spending your money this way. So that's Amazon. Disney's interesting because Disney, although it's not a tech company, they have multiple revenue streams, of course. They have merchandise, they have theme parks. I'll talk about that a little bit. But they have obviously other television, they have their cable television channels, they have broadcast, they have movies, they have all kinds of things. So Disney Plus is, it's meant to be the center of the universe to change the way you think of Disney. And here's something that is really important to understand. Apple is shifting to Apple One and devoting more of its time to the Apple One subscription service, which right now is mostly newsy sorts of things for a low price. But Apple is going to be throwing in, as you can imagine, probably Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and maybe even ad-free search as part of an overall bundle that will entice you to spend your money, which means that you may spend less on other kinds of things, which challenges Netflix. Amazon Prime, I've already mentioned. Disney, let's talk about Disney Plus for a second. You guys think of Disney Plus as just another like major behemoth subscription streaming service that's doing really well. 73 million paid subs after 1 year is pretty incredible. But Disney is actually using Disney Plus and shifting their focus of the entire company to Disney Plus being first. When you think of Disney, like that's their entry point for you to come in and then engage with the whole world, the whole magic kingdom of Disney. And so you can bet that Disney, instead of, just like Apple, instead of having single transactions, individual purchases from you for their goods and services, if you can get into the recurring revenue model and paying a subscription, then that's the holy grail for these companies. That's what Wall Street likes. And so for Disney Plus, Disney is going to be adding, you can bet that they're going to be adding other goodies on higher tier subscriptions, like discounts to theme parks, like maybe a monthly merchandise thing, like a plush toy of something that will delight your kids. Even Disney cruises, yes. Cruises, yes. Cruises, Disney's gonna need to get that back. And so what will they do? In a Disney Plus subscription, they may give you some incentives to do that. So anyhow, Netflix, one revenue stream. All these other big guys that they're up against, multiple revenue streams. And they want more and more of your money out of your pocket, which means you have less money to spend on the other guys, including Netflix. So, and then Netflix, here's the thing about their business model. They're dependent upon continued hyper growth. So it's astounding that Netflix is now 197 million, what was it? 197 million paid subscribers now, 195 million paid subscribers. That's astounding. But the US market for Netflix is largely saturated right now. They got all of us. We all have Netflix. And so what's Netflix's core strategy and what it has been for the last couple of years is international expansion. International expansion. That's where it needs to go. That's the great frontier for them. But international expansion is not as easy as it sounds, even for almighty Netflix. Netflix tried to get into China with its own direct-to-consumer service about 4 years ago, maybe, and they weren't able to do it directly. So they had to partner with one of the major Chinese players, major Chinese companies, to deliver Netflix content, but really from a licensing standpoint. So they weren't able to penetrate the Chinese market on their own. And there are headwinds in all of these various territories that are less, that even almighty Netflix is less able to control. So, as you go outside of the territory of the United States, things get more challenging because you have different kinds of regulations. It's higher cost of doing business overseas. It's higher what they call a customer acquisition cost. It costs more money to get a paid subscriber in. In a lot of territories are mobile-driven, mobile-first territories. And those mobile-first territories are going to, a lot of those populations are not going to be able to pay what they pay in the United States of $15 a month. So you see Netflix pricing overseas frequently being much less than that, a fraction of that. And so all of these are substantial headwinds. And let's not forget also about localized content. So that means content that speaks directly to that local territory. So like in Japan, content that appeals to a Japanese audience. You have your Netflixes in each of those territories, like the Netflix alternatives in each of those territories that cater directly to that market. So Netflix's big challenge is that they need to cater to all markets. They need to spend content on all markets, develop content for all of them. So that's why you see, like in Germany, Dark is a great show. How many of you listen and read the subtitles versus listening to, read the subtitles so you listen to the German rather than the dubbed English? I try to do the German thing. I just like the authenticity of it. But that's why Netflix is in Germany. They're doing, they have a number of shows, but Dark is one of them. But you can imagine how expensive it is to create all these different kinds of programming, localized, they call it, for each individual territory. That's an incredible challenge, especially when Netflix is competing in each individual territory with a number of other players who are much more focused on that territory. So these are some significant headwinds. One-dimensional business model, massive competitors who have multifaceted business models, and who will try to suck more of your money out of your pockets, leaving you less money to spend for more. Netflix has continued on hyper growth to justify its stock value and what it needs to do in the marketplace. But hyper growth is limited in the United States because it's already very much a saturated market. And this new massive competition in the United States may even erode some of that. I don't think you can just assume that it won't. I think that there is that risk. But then overseas, that's where the hypergrowth must come. And I just laid out a number of challenges of why that is not that easy. So this is part of the reason why there are contrarians out there. And this is part of what they say. So here's another significant thing in terms of vulnerabilities. Because Netflix is typically cash flow negative, spending more cash on an ongoing basis than it takes in. And the reason why, by the way, is because it's content dependent to keep us coming in, fresh content. But it takes in less than it spends. So it has a massive debt load. So Netflix's debt right now is about $16 billion. And in the past couple of years, Netflix has continuously had to increase its debt levels, bring more money in, get more loans, mega loans coming in to be able to service that debt. So, that's a big red flag. I'm not saying it's a killer flag, but it's a big red flag. And it's a big burden. Last year, or this past year, they have been cash flow positive, as I mentioned, but the main reason is because they have not been able to spend money on content production this year because production, the ability to have crews out there in the field creating new programming has been completely shut down because of the pandemic. So that's helped the finances of Netflix. It's helped them that way, but it's hurt the available content to us. How many times can you see, what is it called? The Lion King or the Lion Killer? How many times can you see that? So there always needs to be this fresh content. So Netflix is content dependent to keep us coming in. Tiger King, yes, that's the one. So the content has to always be fresh for us to continuously just come to Netflix and without thinking, paying our monthly fee. So that's Netflix's big challenge. And to be able to do that, it has massive content budgets. This past year, 2020, Netflix had budgeted a reported number of $17 billion just to create fresh programming. So Netflix originals and other programming, but that's a massive amount of money. And that's why it had to increase debt to be able to do that. And $17 billion towers over everybody else's content spends for the other major streamers. But the reason why it does that is because that's its calling card. Netflix's calling card is that it has this continuous fresh supply of content that will find something for everybody. That's the hope. It's like throwing spaghetti against a wall to see what sticks with you. And so there's a lot of content out there, certainly a lot of noise, but there's a lot of choice. There's always something to watch, always something. There's a great show out right now on Netflix. The Queen's, somebody texted to me. Gambit, that's the one. Queen's Gambit. Watch the first 3 episodes. It's great. But in any event, so that's what it has to do. Stranger Things, The Crown, Queen's Gambit, I'm sure. Each of these cost about, at least $10 million per episode. So this is really expensive. And you got to do this on an international scale. So Netflix, that's its challenge. It used to have many Disney films on it, many family-friendly films that it would license. So it would essentially rent from Disney. But because Disney got into the game of competing against Netflix, because HBO got into the game of competing against Netflix, et cetera, those competitors now took their content back to focus it purely for themselves. So that's another challenge why Netflix has to even pump up its content creation more than ever before, because some of our favorite shows that we love to stream on Netflix, like Friends as an example, is gone now or will be gone very soon. And if you want the Pixar movies, the Star Wars movies, superheroes movies, and then of course the Disney princesses and all those great, classic crown jewels, you'll have to go to Disney. That's their big calling card. Nobody has the content franchises that Disney does. Netflix certainly does not. And it needs to, it needs to find those franchises. Stranger Things is one of them. But does Stranger Things have the same lasting power as Lion King as an example? I don't know. So anyhow, that's another vulnerability. Here's another vulnerability of Netflix. It is significantly dependent upon third-party distribution, significantly. What that means is that unlike Apple, you have your hub, your Apple TV hub in your home, and Apple has a direct line of communication to you and can place Apple TV front and center on your screen when you open up Apple TV. When you click on, not surprisingly, you'll see Apple TV first and foremost. Yes, of course, through the App Store, you can get Netflix, but it's not there. It's not persistent. You have to go find it, and then it's going to be on your deck, but it's not going to be front and center. So Netflix is dependent upon third-party distribution. And that is a vulnerability. So, there are gatekeepers, and to be able to, so as an example, Netflix is available through Comcast, for those few of you who still have, probably your parents, most likely your grandparents, have cable TV still, they can get Netflix there, but Comcast, as an example, will take a fee, a commission out of Netflix's pocket for the privilege of making Netflix available to their audience. So that's third-party distribution. It's distribution that Netflix cannot control, but that's important to it. And so when you don't have control as a company, that means that you are at the whim of somebody else. And as competitors, if a competitor wants to compete hard with you, they have the ability to cut you off. And that is another vulnerability for you if you're Netflix. So those are some vulnerabilities, and I will answer questions, guys. And I'm just time check. It's 11:42 here on Pacific time. So those are some major vulnerabilities. I do want to identify a counter to some of that. So, some would say that it's not all about subscription numbers, and there's something to be said about the level of engagement, the actual usage dependence upon Netflix versus others out there. And I think there's merit to that, because they would say that if you're dependent upon something, then there's a perception of price to value. Like for this set price, you get a lot, something that you depend upon all the time. So that's kind of a price to value. You as a consumer, when you look at the alternatives in the marketplace and your limited dollars, Netflix, what's its price to value perception for yourself? Well, yes, you may engage with it more, and Disney, you may engage with it less. I mean, you may watch it less, but you still can only get those franchises like Star Wars on Disney Plus. And so maybe even if you don't watch it that much, you still need it. So these are things that like counters to counters to counters, but it all gets back to hyper competition and how Netflix can solve these vulnerabilities. So here are some of the reasons, some of the ways, potentially. It could reduce its content spend. So rather than spending $17 billion a year, which is going to certainly go up, continue to go up, it could just cut that back, not throw as much spaghetti against the wall, focus a little bit more. But it hasn't gone that route. And it's afraid to go that route because it needs this endless supply of fresh content. So every time we click on Netflix and open it up for the night, we see, oh, there's something else new that's being marketed to us front and center. And we see, that's interesting. So, that is one ability or one way to reduce your overall cash burden. But nonetheless, there's significant risk from Netflix's core strategy perspective to reduce that content spend. But if they did, that would help its overall economics a lot. Raising prices. Well, as I mentioned, Netflix just recently raised its prices a couple dollars. And that was just like 2 weeks ago. And this followed several increases over the last several years, dollar. I think the last one was $2. So it went up a little bit. The basic package will now be $13.99 a month, I think. And the upper tier will be $17.99 a month. So the question is, and then internationally, as I said, internationally, there's more challenges to that, particularly in mobile first markets where you're never going to get anything close to that. So how much room does Netflix have to continue to raise its prices? Those who are bullish on the company feel like this price to value perception is so good, so strong for Netflix that they have almost unlimited pricing power to increase this monthly subscription. But I'm not so sure, because for all the dynamic reasons I mentioned, with all these other big players out there who are trying to take more and more of your dollars, we consumers are still cost conscious. At a certain point, if you don't see the series that you love on Netflix, you may choose to cut the cord or stop your subscription for 1 month because it doesn't cost you anything to do that. And maybe you'll stay off it for a while until you see something else that you feel you need to watch, your own must-see TV. So, can Netflix just continuously raise prices by $1, $2, $1, $2, on and on and on? It will need to do that given its economics. Or can it expand its business model so it's not just one revenue stream, which are subscriptions? Maybe it could have multiple revenue streams. Maybe you can add other things. Well, most people ask all the time in their earnings calls, when are you going to add advertising? When are you going to add advertising of some kind or sponsorships to Netflix? And every time CEO Reed Hastings says, we'll never do that. It will interfere with the consumer experience, so we'll never add advertising. Okay, if that's the case though, and you have all these challenges from an economic standpoint, what can you do? Well, maybe you can have higher end subscription offerings. So you have your tiers today that are just purely streaming of Netflix, but maybe you add another like significantly higher tier of services where, I don't know, maybe if you pay $25 a month, you'll get all your Netflix. Maybe you'll get a couple special programs just for you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll also get unlimited passes to your local theater, like MoviePass did before they went under, several months ago. But some of you, I'm sure, were familiar with MoviePass, where you paid a monthly subscription of $9.99 to go to your favorite theaters as many times as you wanted. And because MoviePass was a pure play, they went under. They couldn't afford that. Netflix perhaps could, as a part of an overall package, add those kinds of benefits to, so expand the kinds of benefits that they give, think differently to bring another tier of services that's higher priced. And that would certainly change its overall economics. Mobile first experience. Netflix right now is not mobile first. Very few of the streamers are mobile first. That meaning like that's the first place you go. Netflix is still mostly a lean back living room experience. Well, maybe they can charge something more for something that's optimized specifically for mobile or exclusive to mobile. Some idea. Interactivity. Well, in the games world, some of you are gamers out there. I'm sure many of you are gamers out there. You know the free to play business model where you come in, you can play the game for free on your mobile device. But once you're in, they have your credit card and you'll say, oh, I want that shield. I want that sword. I'll pay for that. And without thinking, it's $1, $1, $1, $1. That's free to play. Microtransactions where you're in the moment, you're heated and you don't care. You're just like, oh, it's so easy to do. Well, maybe Netflix can add some kind of that free to play model into their mobile first content when they ultimately get there, or in some other fashion, but that's just an idea. Netflix, Apple got into the retail market. They shook it up. You know, they went counter when other things, Amazon got into the retail market. When malls were closing, stores were closing, they came in and created flagship stores because they wanted to engage with you both inside your home, you know, while you're on the go, but also outside into the physical environment of stores. Maybe Netflix with its great brand, because Netflix has a brand, obviously, that's underutilized, I would say. Maybe Netflix could have a retail experience of some kind. Maybe they can have Netflix merchandise that you'd pay for. And then experiential entertainment. And I know that Netflix now does have an experiential entertainment department or division within the company, where what that means is you take like Stranger Things and you create some kind of experience. Think about like a theme park experience outside of the home. And it's like Harry Potter World at Universal Studios. Similar kind of thing. That's experiential entertainment. And Netflix could get into that world too, which can be extremely, extremely lucrative. And then maybe acquire some direct distribution to get over its third-party distribution problem. Or, and some people think this may ultimately be the thing, maybe, just maybe, Netflix cannot, because of its economics and all of these challenges and vulnerabilities, maybe ultimately Netflix can't be long-term independent, just an independent company. Maybe, just maybe it can't. Despite its massive brand and massive reach, maybe at some point, one of these much bigger fish comes in and just gives them an offer they can't refuse, shareholders can't refuse. That's a very real possibility, that given the economics and given these vulnerabilities and risks, that rather than have Netflix be a pure play like it is today, independent company, it becomes part of the larger machine for these massive companies. And these are for Apple. Think about it. Apple TV Plus, certainly not hitting it out of the park, right? Well, if Apple TV Plus, or Apple certainly has hundreds of millions of dollars of cash that, or hundreds of billions of dollars of cash, hundreds of billions of dollars of cash, that it certainly has the means to go and buy Netflix. Certainly does. So does Amazon, certainly has the means to do that and would immediately have a juggernaut, you know, immediately. So Apple TV Plus, well, I mean, it's not necessarily all that far-fetched. When Apple Music tried to go on its own and it wasn't succeeding against Spotify, what did Apple do? Apple Music bought Beats Music, and brought that in, rebranded it, and Apple Music took off after that. Now, that was only a $3 billion deal, I think. So significantly, I mean, massively less than a Netflix would be. Netflix would be gargantuan comparatively. But I can imagine a scenario where Apple does a similar thing, where Apple TV Plus doesn't really take off. So they go big. They bring in Netflix. So that's a possibility. And then, you know, there are a number of other big players out there that have the means to be able to buy Netflix. So as much as we think, or many think, or most think, that that's not a possibility, it is. Don't assume, this is an important one, don't assume that the market leaders of today will be around tomorrow. You can't assume that. The overall media tech landscape is littered with companies that looked invincible, like Netflix, invincible at the time, most notably on Netflix's side. Blockbuster Video. How many of you out there, text me, or not text me, chat it out. If you even remember, did you ever if you ever rented a DVD from Blockbuster, let me know. Okay, so Kurt did. Laura Laura did, Sarah did. Okay, Itzhak did, Lewis did. He used to go to Blockbuster every weekend. Same. But so Blockbuster had the world. You know, we had Blockbusters everywhere. The brand was massive. Blockbuster had the chance to take this world of streaming once the world transformed from this, you know, physical environment of DVDs to internet-driven environment where streaming could be of sufficient quality, but it dropped the ball. Netflix launched, and it was a DVD delivery service, mail service, but it was called Netflix from day one. It's like Blockbuster. Come on, guys. You didn't think that they were going to go there? They're screaming what their strategy is by their name. But Blockbuster didn't, and they're dead. You know, they died, and they had the world. You know, they had the world. The world was their oyster. They were killing it, and then they got killed. Kodak, similar. Like back in the day, everybody used Kodak. Kodak film. They saw that the digital revolution was coming, but they stuck their heads in the sands. They were afraid to give up instant revenues of the day to go for the revenues of tomorrow and the growth of tomorrow. And look what happened to them. They're gone. Yahoo, similar kind of thing in the internet world of media. Yahoo was, everybody was using Yahoo. Everybody was back in, you know, the turn of the century of the 2000s. But then they had this big opportunity on the media side, and they completely dropped the ball. At one point, Microsoft was going to buy Yahoo for about $40 billion. They ultimately sold to Verizon for about 1/10 that number. That's how far they fell. And then this is an interesting one. Cisco. Yes, that's Cisco. Does any of you remember the flip phone? They spent something like $600 million to buy Flip. Flip phone was a single purpose device, which is a small mobile hand video recorder, which was really great. But the first time somebody showed it to me, and everybody was getting flips. The first time somebody showed it to me, and this was like 10 years ago, I immediately thought that functionality is going to be built into your phone. It's just obvious that it's going to go there. And then lo and behold, after Cisco spent $600 million, about 2 years later, the flip phone was, or the flip video device was gone. It was just gone because Cisco didn't see the writing on the wall that was the evolution of the smartphone. It was going to be this all-in-one sort of thing. And then TikTok. Okay, so TikTok, killing it, doing all that. But listen, it was almost squeezed out of business by this administration and all the geopolitical things that are going on. So even though almighty Jeff Bezos tells his troops, I predict one day Amazon will fail. So nobody's invincible. Nobody, not even almighty Netflix is invincible. I'm not saying that because I want Netflix to fail or I want it to be acquired. I love Netflix. I think Netflix is great, but that's the contrarian's case. So with that, guys, I will start answering questions. And we're near the top of the hour, but for those of you who want to stick around. I will get to your questions. Otherwise, feel free. That's the actual end of the formal presentation. Remember, the next session is a great one, the Q&A with Rick Farman about the live music festival scene and where it is and how it's going to recover and when it's going to recover. That's December 3rd. And then my top 10 predictions are December 15th. Okay. I'm going to start going through some of these from the top. Let's see. August Miller says, catchy title about my presentation, although not sure entirely how contrarian it is to say that Netflix has some major and structural headwinds. Well, look, when you look at the market, I'm not saying necessarily these are novel observations, but when you look at the market, I don't know what percentage, but I would say 90% of the market out there and analysts out there are bullish. And that's why the price keeps going up, 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 up. So this is a contrarian's case, absolutely. And to me, the most important counter argument to the contrarian's case is that it's not just about subscription numbers. It's about engagement. It's about how much you need Netflix in your life. And they would say nothing's like that. And so they can continue to raise prices on you because you need it so much. Okay, so that's on that side. Kurt says, so many streaming and exclusives to those streaming, we might as well go back to cable TV. So true. So the whole promise of getting into these, of cutting the cord, cutting the bloated, expensive cable package and satellite package, which were, $100, $200 a month, was that you were getting all these, you're paying so much and you were getting all these channels that, and most of which you didn't want or need, but yet you had to have them. So the great promise of these individual flavors like Netflix and Disney Plus was that you're able to buy exactly what you need. It will be much less expensive on a monthly basis. But we've now returned to a world where, okay, Netflix, $15, HBO Max, $15, Disney Plus, $8. And if you want Hulu and ESPN, it's like $12. Amazon Prime, it's a little bit different. You're paying $100+ for Prime, but that's how you get your Prime Video if you want Prime Video. So it's all adding up. You get your Shudder at $5.99. It's all adding up, and pretty soon you're back to where you were when you were trying to cut the cord in the first place. So absolutely. Abby says, and HBO Max hasn't been available on Roku Fire Stick like HBO Go was, so that's been hurting them. Yes, HBO Max certainly has had some issues coming out of the gates. First of all, it's brand. A lot of consumers don't know what it is. They just don't. Many contrarians to the branding decision were that HBO is this premium brand, and you're willing to pay for that. Game of Thrones, what HBO is going to be. It's going to be the best program. It's going to be amazing quality, wonderful storytelling. So why would you take this shining star and put a Max next to it and throw in all this other content together? Why not have a sub brand under like another brand that's HBO, and then you have your other sorts of things? So yes, there's definitely confusion. Kurt asked, did Max replace Go? I think it's all just HBO Max now. Not sure. Let's see. Ariana says, Quibi, huge fail. Yes. A lot of schadenfreude. Yes, I threw out that word, schadenfreude. A lot of schadenfreude in the Hollywood world about Quibi. Hollywood's that kind of place. And so Quibi was such a massively watched story, and it came and went so much faster than anybody, or that I would say most anticipated. Most believed that it wouldn't succeed, but I don't think anybody guessed that it would be gone in 5 months. Ariana, could it have been because of COVID-19 for Quibi? Well, certainly Quibi would say that. Quibi was always meant to be, their strategy was to give you these bite-sized stories, this expensive content throughout the course of your day, not in the nighttime when you're leaning back on your couch and watching Netflix and Disney Plus. Quibi was meant that while you're going to Starbucks, getting your coffee, you'll watch, and you're online, you're watching a little chapter of a movie, and that's what Quibi was for. So it was meant for these bite-sized moments of the day, and obviously they launched in a time where, well, we were stuck at home, so we were leaning back on our couches watching Netflix instead of going to Starbucks and watching Quibi. So that is certainly one major thing that they would point to, but there's so many other reasons why. So I personally don't think it's all that. Let's see. Anam says, playing devil's advocate, what do you think is their best path to sustainable long-term growth for Quibi? Anam, ask another question because they're gone. So I don't know if you're talking about them or talking about Netflix. For Netflix, I think the best strategy is to take a look at some of the solutions I indicated and prioritize which ones you think. I think that Netflix has it has such an amazing brand that has such a hold on our lives. I think they're underutilizing that brand to be able to extract more money from us. So whether it's retail, whether it's merchandise, whether it's experiential entertainment, other things, or like Apple One and Disney Plus will do, Netflix subscription tiers can change to add some of these goodies. That's probably the most likely thing that I would do if I were king. Ariana says, is this negative cash flow for Netflix because of acquisition of content and constant international growth? It's primarily content driven for sure, and that's not going to go anywhere. So it's a massive, the content is wonderful for all of us, but it's, at what point do they need to stop this kind of massive continuous rise in expenditure? Let's see. Ariana says also, it will be an entry point to engage with the magical kingdom, agreed, but also less fragile than this new normal in which resorts, et cetera, are delicate with pandemics. Absolutely, that's true. Disney's been killed, decimated by the theme park division being shut down completely because it's something like 30% of their revenues. But at the same time, and that, by the way, is a significant reason why they repositioned themselves just a couple months ago to put Disney Plus first. Disney Plus is now the head of the strategic mission for Disney. It's there for a reason, because Disney Plus is going to be the hub where you pay and then you get these other goodies, including some theme park passes, stuff like that. Itzhak loves Baby Yoda. That's cool. Do you see YouTube as relevant in any of this with the original content and the fact that they have internationalized so much faster because of the infrastructure of Google? Well, YouTube tried to get into premium programming, but it was saddled with the YouTube name, which is both a blessing and a curse. We all love YouTube, of course, but we don't think of YouTube as being a paid service. We just, we think of it as free content. So YouTube had this branding struggle. It tried to get into premium programming. It dropped that pretty quickly. I don't see YouTube, certainly under the YouTube brand, doing that, but Google absolutely has the means to buy Netflix if it wanted to. Let's see. Abby says Disney Plus is bringing us very little original new content right now. Yes, unlike Netflix, no question. That's a real problem for Apple TV Plus. That's why they throw it in for free if you buy hardware. It's just more like an add-on that way, but Apple TV Plus will be thrown into the Apple One bundle fairly soon. That will happen. Apple Music will too. So it's going to be more of that kind of a player, unless Apple buys Netflix. Let's see. I think Ariana also says, I think Disney Plus is leaning into vintage seasonal content like Hocus Pocus, Home Alone, et cetera, that are part of Buena Vista Disney production. No question that nobody, no service, Netflix, Amazon, nobody has the kind of content crown jewels that Disney has. It's evergreen content of franchises. That's its special sauce. I agree. Disney Plus, its extensive library means it doesn't have to spend as much to create original programming. It's not as much fresh content dependent. Absolutely. I'm scrolling through these. Okay. Anna says, thinking about Quibi, their model was built upon the idea of quick bites, but launched during a period where we kind of had all the time in the world. Yes. So I already answered that question. I'm going quickly. Abby says, how do you think virtual film markets and film festivals will affect Netflix buyers from acquiring in-demand content? Yeah, all these film festivals like AFM and Sundance, it's a problem. Indie filmmakers already had all these kind of headwinds, and now what do? The only place for indie filmmakers to go was on the major streaming services. It wasn't in the theaters. They were already frozen out of theaters before the pandemic. And so, it was dependent upon those kind of showcases and audience reaction, and that's not happening while things are shut down. So indie filmmakers have had challenges, but all these players competing against each other on the streaming side, that is a boon. That's a good thing for content creators generally, because they need your content. They need it. They may not pay as much as they used to, but they need it. See you guys. Thinking about you, and stay positive and stay strong.